Hello, from Rostock.
And you're watching program Make Spiel.
Today we'll tell you about Furnace Duel, a new two-player version of a popular economic game Furnace by Ivan Lashin and co-designed Andrei Kolopayev. The original Furnace combined two key mechanics, which also served as the two game's phases. A unique auction where players compete for company cards and received compensation if they lose, and the production phase, which involves building resource chains from the acquired cards to generate, trade, and sell various goods and materials.
The strongest elements of the original game were the auction and the stunning illustrations on the cards. The production and trading phase, which involved a fair amount of fiddles, was less enjoyable for us.
The engine of a new Furnace Duel is still the auction, which has remained largely unchanged. Two players take turns bidding for cards by placing their discs with values from 1 to 4 on them. The only restrictions are that you can't have two discs of the same color and value on a single card. After that, looking at each card on the market one by one from left to right, the losing player or players receive compensation, and then the winner of the auction takes the winning card. However, the second component of the auction phase has been significantly reworked. As compensation, players no longer just receive resources, they build railroad track on a board located above the card market. Each card slot on the board has railways branches drawn from it, leading north. In this way, players often deliberately lose auctions to build their railway network, which grants them bonuses and access to even more substantial rewards. As in the original game, the higher the value of the disc used to lose the auction, the greater the compensation. The box includes 6 smaller boards with various additional gameplay elements for different regions.
The basic Great Britain map,
The Alps map, where players lay down tunnels.
the Baltic map with the road tokens,
The Transcontinental Railroad map of the USA, where players race to build their part of the track between the continents east and west.
the Victoria map in Australia, where players build roads to recently discovered gold deposits using an area majority mechanic.
And finally, New England map, where players compete for scientific achievements and connections with the best technical universities in the US. In addition, the game features a campaign mode consisting of 6 games played on all 6 boards. Each campaign starts on the Great Britain map, where the Industrial Revolution began, which is the simplest board. Then, in any order, players compete on the other boards, for example, on this map of Baltic Sea, where we came to film this review. For each of these, not only a winner determined,
Who receives 10 campaign points.
but there's also an opportunity to achieve a special objective on each map.
For example, being the first to build 4 tunnels in the Alps.
And several general achievements that both players can earn throughout the campaign.
For example, creating a chain of 8 or more consecutive tracks of their color or accumulating over 20 resources by the end of their game.
When players lose a game, they receive small benefits, components of that map, that can help them turn the tide of the campaign. The money or victory points earned in the final 6th game are converted into campaign points. So even if you're losing after the first 5 games, your chances of winning the campaign remain until the very end. Our copy of the game also came with a mini expansion featuring an auction tracker with a base value of 0, which can be increased by spending coal. From a mechanical standpoint, the new game, in our opinion, surpasses the original Furnace in every way. The modular board not only add an interesting new elements, but also significantly increase replayability. As for the production chains, one important change has been made. In each of the 4 rounds, players can now activate their cards in any orders they want. This makes the production phase feel less restricted. Furnace Duel has two minor drawbacks related to its components. First, the company cards are small, making the stunning illustrations such as the 1920s constructivist factory Krasное Znamя or the famous Zollverein coal mine in Essen much harder to appreciate. And second, the wooden resource tokens from the original game has been replaced with cardboard ones. Our one wish is for the deluxe edition of Furnace Duel with wooden components, larger card like the original, and therefore larger board that would ideally include the names of cities, countries, rivers, and seas. If you enjoyed the original Furnace, we highly recommend playing this one, improved version. If you haven't played Furnace before and looking for a two-player economic game, we also recommend it to anyone who enjoys transportation and economic games and doesn't mind an auction mechanic. The game still has an element of fiddling and endless resource trading, which can be a bit tiring.
I agree.
Finally, we'd like to highlight the character cards, which give players asymmetric abilities. In the original game, they were key to replayability. Here, they synergize with the unique features of the different boards to add even more variety. At the very least, it would be fascinating to play through one full campaign of 6 games, getting to try out different characters. Of course, you can also play single game on your favorite maps outside of the campaign. Beyond the mechanics, we feel it is important to discuss the game's theme. Furnace Duel tackles the topic of the Industrial Revolution, which is inseparably linked to issues of exploitation and social inequality. When the base game Furnace was released, some bloggers criticized it for lack of racial diversity among its characters. They argued that the modern players of all ethnicities and genders should be able to imagine themselves as capitalists and exploiters during the Industrial Revolution in the Russian Empire. This problem was kind of solved in the game's expansion and now in the global themes Duel version. However, it is worth noting, while the colonial powers of the Western Europe often exploited people from the overseas regions, empires in the eastern part of the continent tended to exploit and subjugate of their own population. The most striking example of this was serfdom. By the mid-19th century, more than 40% of population in the central provinces of Russian Empire were part of a system close to slavery. The ranks of industrialists included many of who came from serf families, such as Sava Morozov, a well-known entrepreneur and philanthropist whose family bought their freedom from serfdom. Different regions and countries have their own histories of exploitation and liberation, and we believe it is important that the voices of the oppressed from the periphery be heard just as much as the voices from the metropole, no matter of the color of their bodies. The board game Furnace Duel stands alongside other excellent economic games focused on capitalism and the Industrial Revolution, such as the modern classic Brass. However, it is entirely within the logic of glorifying capitalism and silencing the voices of the exploited working classes, the very workers of the factories players are building. The addition of black characters doesn't change this situation. It is only shows that the color of the one's skin doesn't matter much, as exploiter can be anyone. The unequal and unjust distribution of resources on a global scale has only intensified since then, and economic games like this one perpetuate the myth that anyone can succeed. The problem lies within capitalism, not with racial inequality. Under capitalism, some people will always exploit others. It would be great if modern games focused more on the oppressed rather than replacing concepts and falsifying history by putting some people in the place of their oppressors. As we remember, the original Landlord's game, the predecessor to Monopoly, was intended to show that owning land and the means of production leads to the ruin of everyone except a handful of people. Unfortunately, people misinterpreted this, concluding not that the economic system is flawed, but that anyone of any skin color has a chance to be among of the 1% of exploiters, rather than the 99% of the exploited. In reality, the vast majority of people on our planet have virtually no chance of winning at Monopoly.